Screw those naysayers. I'm going to do it anyway. They're all telling me I'm crazy. I can't do it. When I told my mother, she just about swallowed her cigarette. Telling me that sputtering about.
How could you be so stupid? And
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Scratch Entrepreneur. True stories of remarkable people who dropped everything to turn an idea into a healthy, profitable business. I think about business probably 70% of my waking hours. I'm not 100% proud of that, actually. There's certainly mental space that needs to be freed for more about family and fun and nature and playing tennis and riding my bike. But I obsess about the details, the upcoming decisions, the internal systems, the right ways to market. Do we have enough clients? Do we have too many clients? Are they the right clients? On and on. Thinking about your business is a good thing, but cycling on it isn't always, or maybe isn't at all. McKenzie always pushes me to think through a decision, make it, and move on. Yesterday's decisions are over. Celebrate your successes, learn from your failures, but mostly move forward. I think she's right. Our guest today has certainly done that. His big entrepreneurial move happened when he was a big shot sales guy at a large corporation. Like so many, he realized that he never saw his kids, he drank too much, and while his pockets were full, his soul was empty. So he dropped out. He left his way up the ladder sales job, the big city, and his entire adult idea of employment. He and his family moved to a tiny fishing village in Nova Scotia, Canada. It was there that he started the entrepreneurial journey he'll share with us today. Tim Alison heard a lot from naysayers at that time, but he didn't listen then, and he's here to tell us why you shouldn't listen either. We're glad you joined us. Hey, this is Jeremy Goodrich, owner of Shine Insurance Agency and your host for the Scratch Entrepreneur podcast. We're here today with Tim Alison. Tim has done a lot of stuff in his life, and he'll talk about this throughout our conversation. But the biggest piece that we're going to talk about is really dropping out of corporate culture and deciding to start his own business. And not only kind of the successes, but also some self-doubt that happened there and the naysayers. He has now built a business called Screw the Naysayers, and he's going to talk to us a little bit about how he has gone through that process and how he can help us, how we can learn from Tim. So Tim, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, Jeremy, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
So is there anything I missed in that intro that's important to point out right from the start?
No, man, I think you got it.
Okay, cool. So let's take a step back real quick. Can you tell us just a funny story from when you were a kid, something that helps us get to know you a little bit?
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know whether it's funny, but it's what I remember a long time for a lot of my life. I'm the guy that couldn't get a date to his senior prom, man. I mean,
Yeah.
it was, I just like that. I wasn't a physical guy. I had a bunch of health issues like broken bones and things like that because I love sports, and even though the body wasn't built for it, I was just too stubborn. So I'd go out and kept doing that till I was about 13 or 14 years old. And then I finally realized that the hospitalization was not a great outcome, But the reason I say it, I laugh about it today because in all honesty, man, it does tell you a bit about my determination. So like when people tell me I can't do something, they say, yeah, Nan, you'll never be able to do that. I mean, if it involves the threat of physical pain, then I'm very prone to believe them. I've had this innate reaction for so many years now. When people say I can't do something, it just says, well, screw you. I think I'm just going to go. But it doesn't scare me. So, it's crazy. Eh? There are blessings inside of something that was not much fun, and still isn't. I still, struggle with some of those bone and joint issues, but it gives you perspective, on other things that has, I think maybe compensated for it.
Yeah. Are there times when you say yes to stuff just because you want to be able to do it and then just wish you hadn't?
I don't spend a lot of time looking back and saying, I guess I don't believe in second choices. There's a poet by the name of Mario Reichhauser who has a wonderful poem about, there's no such thing as second choice, and beware anybody who talks to you about it. So I think I've been around long enough that I don't spend a lot of time saying, I wish I hadn't done it. I mean, a couple of instances do come to mind. We were in the Greek Isle of Sifnos with my wife, a couple of years ago, and I'm into my early 60s, so I was my late 50s then, and I'm not as fit as I would want to be because of the bones, And so we were following this trail that looked pretty well marked, and ended up into a little goat trail that ended up into me having to get down on my hands and knees at times in order to go up and down. I mean, those were days when I was saying, this might not have been the smartest thing, but as soon as you finish the darn thing, you say, wow, that was the best day I've had in 10 years. So, it is what it is. I push the boundaries, man. I always push boundaries. And it's going to get me in trouble, I guess, one of these days. But what's life for?
Well, yeah, it's like either it's a great success and you're glad you did it, or it's a great story and you can tell it later. Like either way, it's going to be something that, if you're taking chances and doing things of that nature. I also thought about this linear idea of not looking back. So my wife, McKenzie, and I own Shine Insurance together, and her dad kind of taught her what you just described. It's like you make a decision and then you move forward from there. And it's always a linear process that you're working through in the now and not in the past. And I tend to always want to go backwards and like start from the beginning again. Okay, well, let's remember where we were there. Maybe we could remake that decision, like taking conversations backwards. And so I'm hurting the forward progress sometimes, and she'll just say, look, we made that decision already. Let's be in the now and let's move forward from here. And I think that's what I'm hearing from you too.
Really, my first business coach, Bob Crockett was his name, or is his name, although I think he's long retired. But Bob put it to me this way. He says, we're programmed to do our best, Jeremy. And when we're entrepreneurs, I mean, I've been an entrepreneur for 30 plus years, so I shudder to think about how many decisions I've made. And a whole lot of them haven't worked out the way I had expected them to. But I can honestly say that I never once made a decision thinking this is not the right thing to do. I think there's greater risk, and I see people suffer in life and in business, but just in life in general. There's much greater risk in failing to take into account that if you decide not to do something, that is also a decision. So it's only through action, and in my experience, it's only through action that takes us somewhat outside of our comfort zone. If it just feels too easy, it doesn't mean you won't make money doing it or whatever. But I guess the other thing is with age. I mean, I'm way more focused right now on making an impact and on feeling and visualizing and seeing the results of things. I don't know how many new products and services I've launched over the years, and I'm not going to lie. I mean, everybody has those thoughts that you're talking about there. It's human nature. Man, I wish I hadn't done that. We all say that, but what you got to do is just say it. Another friend of mine, a guy named Brian Schulman, I mean, I love that he was on my podcast. I have a Screw the Naysayers show. And Brian sums it up this way. He says, you never lose. You either win or you learn. And if you start doing it that way, you say, well, the only time it gets tough, and it does get tough, is if you can't really put your finger on what the lesson is. I don't think we talk about that enough. It's just not always so, okay, that didn't work. Sometimes it hits you right in the forehead as to why it didn't work. But there's a lot of times when it's far more complex than that. And especially if you're trying to read human relationships. Like my businesses over the years have always been built through collaboration and a lot of partnership. And, and I've never liked reinventing the wheel. So when you get into a circumstance where something doesn't work and you find yourself trying to get to the root of it, sometimes the conclusion you come to is that I didn't read that person the way I usually do. That's a harder lesson to figure out, because then you have to ask yourself, well, what mistake did I make in reading Jeremy or Tim or whatever? And you can't always put your finger on it. But
yeah, making decisions is exactly what you said. It's either a win or a lesson. And then the lessons are what you're talking about there. It's like, okay, well, what lesson can I take from that? Right now, I'm working a lot on what do I want to do with marketing? We're very referral based. I like that fact. So I don't want to necessarily go out with this blanket marketing scheme and just kind of have all these people coming at us. And it's all these conversations. But I just you just have to make a decision. You have to put some some money behind it, and then you have to see what happens and move forward from there. So everything's a building block, whether it's a success or, and that's a pretty common idea. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs say that you have to learn from your mistakes. It's the biggest piece, right? And you have to make mistakes. If you're not making mistakes, then you're not doing something right.
If you're not making mistakes and if you don't feel uncomfortable a fair bit of the time, and if there aren't at least some people in your life looking at you like you're just a little off, then chances are you're just in a comfort zone. And I can guarantee you this, that the basic laws of physics apply to a business. And, and I'm not a great scientist, but I do know that everything is basically in motion in this world. So a business is either growing or it's shrinking. It is never staying exactly like it was. It's not possible to plateau. And danger zone is when people get comfortable and say, oh, I'm here, I've made it, this is what I want. And, it depends how far along you are and everything else. But I'll guarantee you the business is going up and growing in some way. Doesn't have to be money. It might be growing resources, might be growing new products, might be growing knowledge, but it's growing in some way or it's losing.
So back to the kid story. So you were always doing things that, were kind of exciting and risky, even if your body didn't want you to. And did that continue as you left high school and went into kind of the adult world?
It didn't. It didn't from the physical standpoint. But what it did was it left me with one hell of a chip on my shoulder. So you think when you're going through high school and all this kind of stuff, and we all know this, I'm an old enough guy to remember, Bob Dylan, that he is first will later be last type of thing, or he is last will later be first. I mean, so, you're nobody in high school, and all this kind of stuff. And when I hit the corporate world, I did what I was told in my generation, which was go to school, get into a good university, get your degree, get out there, climb on that corporate ladder. And man, when I entered the workplace, it was dog eat dog was the mantra, and it was respected. You were in my way, and if you weren't smart enough to get out of my way and I knocked you over figuratively, that's your problem, not mine, I turned out I was really good at doing that. I really didn't seem to give a what about others. And so I got on that corporate ladder. I landed a sales job with a tremendous chip on my shoulder, and I kicked ass. Now my body during this whole process was telling me all along, this is not good. It's 5 years, man. I was on that treadmill at 28. I joined the $100,000 a year club, and this was in the 1980s. It's serious scratch now, but that put me in the top 2% in North America at the age of 28. By the time I was 30, I live in Canada, but I was managing sales offices in Toronto, Montreal, and Ottawa. So basically half the country. All of the people reporting to me were much older than me, much more experienced. And I honestly think when I went to the bathroom that my stuff didn't smell. I was just this hotshot. In a lot of ways, Jeremy, the poster child, this is what success is supposed to look like. Tailor-made clothes. I'm not wearing that today. Your viewers won't see it, but your listeners. But you'd have caught me in pinstripe suits with monogrammed shirts with gold chains, all this cashmere, jackets, all this kind of stuff. None of that crap I cared about when I was growing up. It just sort of was the uniform. And so friends and family, like I said, poster child, this guy's got it all. I was married. I had a couple of kids by the time I was 30, 31, a boy and a girl, everything. And I'd get home at night and I'd walk into the kitchen and I would grab a bottle of rum and I'd pour myself a triple or a quadruple, rum. I'd go sit down. The kids would already be in bed because by the time I got home, they were already in bed. I'd swallow that. I'd eat a reheated dinner. I'd lie down on the couch for a second, fall asleep. My wife would wake me up, tell me to go to bed, and I'd get up the next morning before my kids were up, and I'd leave, rinse, wash, and repeat. And every other week I'd be traveling, on an airplane in a hotel and out. When you're the boss coming in with the unlimited expense account, people are expecting you to wine and dine, whether it's employees or staff.
And that's just how it was done. That was success.
It was success.
I don't know the corporate world very, very well at all, but is that still success?
I don't think so, but I do think there is still. Here's the root problem behind all that definition of success. The definition was being provided to me by others. Success was achieving quota. Success was winning a competitive bid and making sure knocking the other guys down a peg. Success was getting a promotion, getting a new job title, getting a raise. those things are still measures today, for people when they go to work for employers. And the problem is, and took me, I've studied this whole issue of happiness for, most of the last 30 years to try and figure out why I was so unhappy. And here's the thing, man. I mean, when we're growing up, happiness is experienced in basically two pretty simple ways. One is we just try things, so some things, especially when we're teenagers and we meet, people that we're interested in, some of those things feel nice and we like to do them again, or you give me ice cream. I like it or I don't, but if I like it, I might like it a lot. But we also are groomed from the earliest moments of time to search for external validation. We come home from school with a good report card. Mom and dad pat us on the back, probably bribe us, give us some money or something like that.
Yep.
It feels good. They brag to everybody about how smart we are, and other people tell us how great we are. This feels good. This is happiness to us. It's an emotion we don't understand, so we're just learning to experience it. And the flip side is we come home and we've not met expectations. It doesn't feel good. So we're trained to crave external validation. We're trained at school to be measured by whether somebody else says our retention of this information indicates is a predictor of our future success, which it's not. We don't know it at the time. We go all the way through that, and that process continues. Like, okay, you should be going to university, and I think we're still telling way too many people that the only path. I'm not rapping on all universities, but I do think it's a bunch of BS that the only path to success is through a 4-year degree program somewhere.
Well, maybe it's the structure of the way the college system works too, in that it's that same system of do what we've subscribed, succeed by some grade or extrinsic motivation, and that's setting people up for
It's
that.
compliance based. It's memorization based, and frankly, it's a system set up to enrich others. It's not student centered, and it hasn't been for since its inception. It was designed to create workers for the Industrial Revolution, and we just haven't done much to change that that model. But we could talk all day on that sucker. But the problem
Right.
is that back to your because you asked a really big question. I think an important question about how we're defining success today and how a lot of young people are. The problem is when they graduate from university, especially if they've gone to college and they've got debt and they've been raised to say, well, it's my task is to go out there and get a job. And I get a job. And once I've got that job, my task is still to get a better job. And unfortunately, now they're hitting a workplace that it's not the fault of millennials. It's certainly not the fault of Gen Z, that they're both hitting and involved in a workplace that's changing more than I think any other time in history, with the possible exception of the Industrial Revolution. When machinery brought people out of the fields, into factories and all of these kind of things, because the stats are telling us that these young people are not graduating into the jobs they were expecting. 50% of North Americans under the age of 30 are underemployed or unemployed. Most of them are underemployed. But that means they're working at something that they probably don't like. People always say, well, I get hate trolls on my various social media sites thinking that I'm saying, if you work as a barista at Starbucks, something that's bad. It's not. It's great because I love my coffee and a lot of us do. But if you've gone to university for 6 years aspiring to be something else and you're still having to work as a barista to pay the bills, and that's not what you wanted to do, then it is a problem. And we haven't created these opportunities. The types of jobs that are out there, and frankly, our corporate, I don't want to say corporate America, I know that's where you're at, but I think corporate Western world, capitalist system, has been set up to screw these employees. These people weren't stupid. They looked and they said, we've got an overwhelming surplus of people who want these jobs. So what we're going to do is we're just going to stop investing in professional development. They stopped in about the 90s, and they'll invest in the stars. If they identified Jeremy really early on as a potential VP, a fast tracker, they spent a fortune on you. But everybody else, they considered to be a disposable asset. We know that you're going to burn out. We'll put you in that sales treadmill or whatever. You will burn out and leave. We don't care, because as soon as you burn out, there's going to be 10,000 other resumes fighting for that, that one job. And they were in that cycle for for the last 20 or 30 years, and it's reversing itself. there is a people's revolution underway that a lot of corporations haven't quite figured out, and they're going to be in for a lot of pain.
Well, and I think the corporations that have figured it out, and I think we'll get into, your personal revolution, and I think that'll say a lot about kind of what you're talking about. But I think the corporations that have figured that out are having a ton of success and getting, especially the millennials that are the best at this new way of doing business and this new way of being happy, and this new way of being fulfilled in your life and your work life balance. I think corporations are going to figure that out, one by one,
Some.
or they're going to,
Some.
yeah.
But a lot of them aren't, and they will fail. You're a little bit younger than me, and I would really challenge you to, take a list someday of the top 100 companies in the United States, print it off, stick it in your drawer, and 20 years from now, go back and look at that list and see who's going to be there. Some are going to be gone completely. A ton will have merged or whatever, but the change is going to be remarkable, because your point about millennials and Gen Z in particular, but certainly millennials, it applies as well. They are not willing to do what I was willing to do, which is that they won't trade their values for money. They just won't do it.
And I think that's what the corporate world and the traditional world is saying is the problem with millennials. And I think the reality is it's exactly what's right about the way this generation is looking at life.
Boom. You've said it exactly right. It's not the millennials. It's the attitude of the employers.
So you dropped out of the corporate world, and we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about that a little bit and how you changed your life and found a way to really overcome some of those value structures and find happiness in more fulfilling ways. Does that sound good?
Sounds perfect.
Cool. Hey, we're back with Tim Allison, founder of Screw the Naysayers Productions. He has a podcast called Screw the Naysayers and has written a book as well. And we're really just digging into finding happiness in your life and in your business and doing that in the way that makes the most sense to you. So, Tim, you were in the corporate world. You just described to us how you were kind of in that cycle of not being home for your kids, of working real hard, making a lot of money, finding some happiness in maybe the financial side, but not so much in the balance of both. What was the trigger? What made you decide to make a change?
It's really interesting, because I've actually talked on my own show. I've talked to so many other people who've kind of gone through similar transitions, and a lot of them will have a story of, there was this one day and something was said to me, and I had this epiphany or whatever, and I went out and I did it. It was a painfully slow process for me, Jeremy. And that's one of the reasons why I ultimately wrote my book, Screw the Naysayers, because for most people, making a change like that, after you get sort of caught up in it, and you're making a lot of money, and the traipse, and you've got everybody telling you you're successful. And believe me, when I did eventually quit that job, the entire universe thought I was completely insane, that I'd lost it all, and so I was having all those internal battles in my own head for a couple of years. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, and it would be on like two alter egos. I mean, one side would pop up, and
right, would say, why are you doing this? Why are you?
Yeah, I'd say, look, if you don't quit, you're going to be dead or divorced, within 5 years, probably both, probably sooner. And I know in my soul they were right. But then the other one would say, are you off your tree? Nobody quits a job like this. Like you'd have to be the world's biggest lunatic and all of this kind of stuff. And so, I struggled, and I describe it in my book. I don't know where the phrase came from, but I described it as a feeling like I was standing under a leaky bag of cat urine for a couple of years and just paralyzed, and I couldn't move, Probably the combination of my health. By then I was abusing alcohol so much that I was drinking a large bottle of Pepto-Bismol every single night and still had heartburn. And I just felt lousy. And I was watching my kids grow up without a father. And I think it just pushed me to the wall where I said, well, I can't. I've got to, go do something. What's interesting about it is that we were living in Toronto at the time, and I had come to the conclusion that just quitting the job wasn't going to be enough, that I really needed to get out of the city. And my wife was born and raised in this little Acadian fishing village. I'm talking to you today, looking out the window at the same forest that I was looking at 30 years ago when we moved. But it's a little fishing village. And back then, it's even much as it is today. If you didn't work in the fishery or in the forest or, for government or something like that, you didn't have a job. And, with the health that I described, I wasn't going to go, get a job on a
Right.
lobster boat, and all that kind of stuff. So not only did I quit, but I announced to everybody that we were, I was packing up my wife and two kids, and we were moving to this little village of about 300 people in the middle of nowhere. And I was going to start the business that I started in those days was an educational software company. This is going to really date me, so people will either ignore the lessons or listen. But man, the internet didn't even exist.
Yeah.
There
Uh-huh.
were no laptop computers.
Right. So what does
this is,
educational software mean at that point?
well, yeah, today, of course, we'd say e-learning, but the word didn't even exist. And the point I always like to stress about the big learning moment in there that I'd love to share with your listeners here and with you is that I felt good. Okay, I've screw those naysayers. I'm going to do it anyway. They're all telling me I'm crazy. I can't do it. When I told my mother, she just about swallowed her cigarette. Telling me that sputtering about.
How could you be so stupid? And
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Eh? But the thing is, then I got down here and I started the business, but the reality is that I hadn't realized that I had actually taken in way more of the negativity about what I was capable of than I realized, because I'd been at the top of the pile in Toronto. Now I was telling myself, okay, I'm here. You did it, man. You walked away. And I'd literally get goosebumps sometimes just thinking about that I did it. I felt good. But I went around for 3 years. I told everybody that my goal is to make enough money to put food on the table and feed my family and, and keep a roof over our heads. And not surprisingly, that's exactly what I did and not a cent more. Like I had really bought into that limiting self-belief that I had traded any hope of a great career and a good job and financial success and everything else. In return, I was like a martyr. I'd made this sacrifice for my family and and all this kind of stuff.
I just want to reiterate what you just said, because I think that's such an important point, that you walk away from something, and when you take that risk, you think, oh man, well, if I can just feed my family. And that's exactly what you do. And it's almost like wherever you set your goals, and I hear that with my business coach a lot, and I'm sure you say that to folks a lot as well, wherever you set your goals, like those are the places you end up. And so set the goals higher. And I interrupted you a little bit, but I just wanted to reiterate that,
It's kind of the mission that I'm on today with my Screw the Naysayers, movement, really, which is what it is trying to help people understand that you're surrounded by people who are sometimes because they love you and they fear that if you try something and it doesn't work, you'll get hurt. They're trying to limit your expectations. And a whole lot of other people want to limit your expectations because they've opted out of a system. They don't even remember what it means to dream anymore. And that damned if they want you to be more successful for that than them. And then you got the real assholes. I hope I can say that on your show.
That's fine.
These ones are the real assholes who just get off on seeing people in pain and failing. And sadly, if you look at the world we're in, I mean, there's a big number of all of those things. So the second thing I really learned on that journey, and that if I had to say the two most important life business lessons, but really life lessons, is that the support of even one person can completely change the trajectory of your life. So what happened to me is there I was just going along, making a living, paycheck to paycheck would be the best way to describe it, which is, as a business owner is a pretty uncomfortable place to be because you have to be sure that the next paycheck will be there. Somebody else doesn't write the check. If it's not, if you don't make it, you don't get it.
Yeah.
It was a cold, blustery Nova Scotia winter, and I got a phone call, and a friend of mine said, "Look, there's this guy down working out of this company in the States, and he said if you'll pay a plane ticket to San Diego, you can go to a dealers meeting." Potential dealer, distributors, they'll pay for your hotel, your meals, and the whole bit. And they're going to talk to you about this new product they got to teach adults literacy and numeracy skills. Well, I knew nothing about that part of the market. I was selling to, big corporations, data processing, training, that kind of stuff. But it was cold and it was winter. And I said,
and it was San Diego.
And I said, Debbie, I'm so sorry to have to do this to you and leave you home with the two kids, but I'll be back in a week. And the first reaction when I met Roy, became my greatest friend and mentor, rest in peace, Roy. But, I thought he looked like a used car salesman when I first met him. I actually liked the product. I mean, I knew nothing about literacy and numeracy training. I knew a ton about educational technologies by then. And I knew it was state of the art. I knew they were doing things that other people weren't doing. But Jeremy, it was so American. Like, for example, if you want to teach math in Canada, you have to have metric lessons. We don't teach imperial measurement, And in teaching reading, it was doing that quite well, but it was also teaching people to be good Americans. So there were lessons on the U.S. Bill of Rights and the Constitution and all this kind of stuff, which, again, you just can't subject students in Canada to that kind of curriculum. So I'm sitting there thinking, no, well, it's interesting, but I can't do anything much with that. And Roy started talking to me, and I said, well, he said you should take this on. You should take it national and see if you can't get some people interested in it. And I said, Roy, I can't go national. I'm working out of my basement. You go down the steps. I've got a wood stove and this was true. The wood stove was at the basement and the bottom of the steps. My desk was a 4x8 sheet of plywood that these tiny hands had somehow managed to nail together with 2x4 legs that I had MacTac, the stuff we put inside cupboards, as a top of my desk, I said, I can't run a national company from there, Roy. And he looked at me and he said, you're an idiot. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, look at all the success you had when you were in Toronto. And he said, I'm talking to you and I can see all the ability. And he's like 30 years older than me. And this is another thing that your listeners probably won't relate to, but in those days we had to mail our card bills. We had to send the check in the mail to pay the things off. So Roy says to me, he says, Tim, do you know where I send my American Express check every month? And I said, well, no. He said, well, I don't really know either, but it's somewhere in North Dakota or South Dakota, some little. He said, I don't give a crap. Why do you think anybody else cares? The only person who cares that you're living in this little village in the East Coast is you.
And so Roy was motivating you. Roy was taking you out of it.
But he challenged my limiting self-beliefs. And a switch went off. And then I started bouncing ideas off him, Jeremy. So I'd say, well, okay, Roy, we can't sell this thing in Canada like it is. I can't sell it. He said, well, what can you do about it? And I said, well, look, what if I hired some teachers up here and because I understood the technology a lot, what if I crafted Canadian lessons that could be literally placed into your templates, like the same number of words, the same correct answer if it's multiple choice, but the text and pictures would be different. What if I went to the Canadian Archives in Ottawa, the library, the equivalent of your Library of Congress, and I got a bunch of pictures, and we put them in there. And instead of saying that's crazy, he'd say, well, I think that's a nice idea. Why don't you try that? And I learned, instead of saying I can't do that, if I just say, well, what if I tried this? And I just, that question, that's the third part of the lesson. Like, what if I try? What if I did this? Or what would I have to do in order to overcome those barriers? And so, long story short, man, worked at that. 6 months into working on this partnership, I get up one morning and I had not sold one single license. It was an expensive product, like $50,000 or something. But I was spending like 80% of my time on it and making none of my money. And I said to myself, I got to do something. But what I did is I dumped everything else. I looked at it and I said, no, this is right. It has the potential to be a serious business, not something that's just going to make a paycheck to paycheck. And the problem is I'm not 100% in. I'm only 80% in. So I got rid of all the stuff that was paying me. I dumped it all. I went full steam, ahead. And we went on. We sold over $10 million of that stuff across the country. More proud of the fact that I helped set up 115 learning centers in community colleges, in First Nations communities, nonprofit organizations, where adults and at-risk youth got to work on upgrading their math and literacy skills so they could maybe get a GED or get a better job or whatever. Worth way more to me. I wish I knew how many lives I touched, but it was third-party type of thing. But it all happened because this one guy just kicked me in the ass. And as soon as he did that, I stopped listening to all these voices in my head that said, I can't do it. And I totally tuned out anybody else who said I can't do it. And I really, for the next 30 years, if you want to get me to do something, I'm the easiest guy to trick with reverse psychology. Just tell me I can't.
You basically screw the naysayers. As we're having this conversation, is not just other people. It's also maybe even more so the naysayer in your head and how to manage that,
There's a great book I'd love to recommend to your listeners, and it's an oldie, and you're not going to think it's really about business, but it's from a guy named Stephen Pressfield, and it's called The War of Art. Not the art of war, but the war of art. And he talks about letting creative change into our lives. So like I first read it when I was trying to write my first book. And I was struggling a lot. And so he talks about this voice in our head. He calls it resistance. But this I know to be true, and I talk about it in my little book quite a bit too, because here's the thing, man. If you have an idea, like we all get ideas. Every single day we wake up, or every single week, something pops into our head that, I could do this or I could do that. Most of those ideas are just ideas. They just come through and they filter out, they leave, they don't grab us. But every so often, something gets stuck in your head. and it won't get the you know what out, eh? And you're waking up in the middle of the night thinking about it, but what you're doing is not waking up in the middle of the night all excited about it. You're waking up making a list of reasons in your head why it won't work or what might go wrong or why you can't take that chance. It's my family livelihood, or I've worked too hard to get to this stage, or whatever it might be. That is the voice of resistance. And here's the thing: if you find yourself waking up and it won't get the hell out of your head, it's the truest possible indicator in the universe that you have actually identified something that you really, really want to do. Because otherwise, you wouldn't care enough to make up a list of reasons what would happen if you failed. It's something that if you could do it successfully, it would transform your life. It would bring happiness, or it would help others in a way that you've always aspired to do. There could be any number of motivations to it, but it's the truest guidance. I mean, I say in my book, it can be really frustrating when this voice in your head is telling you not to do something, this little Debbie Downer that keeps telling you that's a bad idea type of thing. But the frustrating thing about that voice is it actually knows what the F you really want to do, even when you don't. So it's training ourselves. It's training ourselves that when that happens to actually embrace it and to let go of the anxiety and sit down and say, okay, it might not be that I have to do exactly what I'm thinking about. Something in that idea is really important to me. And if I could make it happen, it would really fulfill me. That's where essential, long-term, sustainable happiness comes from. It's not from money. It's not from the 10 million. It's not from the cars you buy. It might be from the things you learn when you travel, but it's not the travel itself. I mean, it's when you get to that point in time when you know that you're doing something that's impactful and important to you. And then you're really hard to stop. You don't get easily discouraged.
For a listener who's sitting in that space, right, where you've got that thing spinning in your head, you know it's a good idea. And if you do it well, you could have success doing it. You could find happiness doing it. All the boxes are checked. I don't think most people's advice is that you go to your job tomorrow and you just quit and you start from there. Like, what are a couple of concrete steps that someone who has that in their head, who has taken really that internal step of like, okay, I do want to do this. I am going to do this. I'm not going to listen to the naysayers. I think we talk as entrepreneurs a lot about, you just drop what you're doing and go do this new thing. But what are a couple of like logical steps that someone can take to make that transition?
The way I say that in the book is, I'm not recommending you perform radical surgery on your life without taking a look at what the consequences might be. I mean, you can't. It's easy when you're 20 or 21. And that's the other message in my book. The longer you wait to try and figure out what it is you really want in life, the more challenges you're going to face in extracting yourself. It wasn't easy for me to extract myself at 31 because I had a wife and 2 kids and all these kind of things. But I will say this, I'm not a big believer in backup plans. Like when you do decide to go all in, don't go in with an attitude is I'm going to try this, but if it doesn't work, I can always go do this or go do that, because that's the same as saying I'll make enough money to put food on the table and keep a roof over my head. But the neat thing that I think has really changed in the last few years, when it comes to starting a business, is that we've got infinitely more opportunities to test our ideas without spending a lot of money. So I think you really need to invest in. This is one of the things. I have an online mentoring and support community that we're going to be doing some sessions on for our members on things like, without getting too technical, but what a lean canvas map is. But without confusing people, it's just a way of killing ideas. It's the simple way of saying, okay, I have an idea that I really think would work here. So it's kind of a gated process. You say, well, okay, what are all the things that could go wrong? And then let's go back and start looking at them one at a time type of thing. I give this example. When I was thinking about writing that first book, and I was stuck, and I was going on vacation with my wife, and we're, as Canadians, you might be allowed now, but we're allowed to go to Cuba. So we're at the airport in Cuba waiting to go through their security checks, and that you have to go up one at a time. You can't go up with your spouse or partner or whatever. And I go up to the front, and the card's there, and the guy says, well, what do you do for a living? And I don't know why I said this, man, because I was still selling software or whatever, but I said, I'm an author. And he got a big smile on his face, and he picked up a pen and he waved it and he pointed at it and he said, yeah, I'm an author. And, he smiled and great stamped it and go through. And, for the rest of the trip, when I'm lying on the beach, I had paper and pencil and things were flying all over the place. And so acting the part, if you go share the idea first off with your wife, and I'm sure she's an amazingly supportive, probably more brilliant and better looking than you. If it's like my family.
All those things for sure, yeah.
But here's the thing. Sharing ideas with people that we know, their responses are filtered based on their perceptions of what we're capable of or what risk we should be willing to tolerate or any of those kind of things. If we share ideas with people that don't bring those perceptions to us, by simply acting the part, putting yourself out there, going someplace, and if somebody asks what you do, tell them, even if you're working as a systems analyst, but you plan to have this adventure tourism business guiding people down the Tallahassee River, if there is such a thing, tell them that that's what you do.
Yeah.
And see how they respond and listen to it's such an empowering feeling when people look at you and they think, well, that's credible. You don't fit. You could do that job. You can have what if conversations. Like if you've got an idea for a specific product, or service, get out there and with the power of LinkedIn and in particular, I'm a huge fan of LinkedIn, but taking the time to make connections in a sector, reaching out, having virtual coffee chats, and just have what if conversations. Hey, if I was doing this, would you or do you think, do you know anybody? I mean, is this a good idea, bad idea? They don't know you from Sam. So they're going to give you, they do. They know you because you've responded with respect to their posts and provided validation for their content and vice versa. But they don't judge, they just give you that information. So test your ideas. There's so many ways to test your ideas without blowing your budget. It's really hard to do that without getting some mentoring. Without sounding self-serving, that's what's leading me back to. It's why I started this little community called Entresphere, because I think the school system is done such an appalling job of preparing young people, for this reality that all of a sudden in their 20s, they've got to find their own opportunities, whether it's to be a freelancer or to create a bigger business or to even just to find your own job. We've told them to sit down, to follow instructions and to wait for instructions. And so when they're stuck in a job that they don't like, they're waiting for instructions and nobody's giving them the instruction manual. So that's why I think we need communities. Naysayers travel in packs. We've got to do a better job of traveling in packs so people can say, I got this idea, and nobody's allowed to say that's stupid. You can't. You can say that's interesting. Why do you want to do that? Who do you think you might help? What's stopping you? How could we help you? I mean, who else could help you? As soon as you get this momentum going, in community or with somebody that believes in you, crap. I mean, there's success stories that are out there that are just mind-boggling to me when I see what people are doing in their early 20s. I used to feel like, and I was, Jeremy, I was way ahead of my pack. I mean, my cohort. I was easily in my 20s. I was the top earning per individual from my high school. A kid who couldn't get the date, married 2 kids, had the highest income. And certainly in my 30s, I had, for what I wanted to do in terms of opting out of that corporate system. A lot of people do it now. People weren't doing that. And especially not in such a radical way. I was way ahead, but now I look at these kids in their 20s, that's 17, 15. Oh, well, I've started this Minecraft server and I got 100,000, users, or there's a 15-year-old girl in Toronto, Canada. Oh my heavens, her name, I'll give it to you to put in your show notes.
Yeah, we'll put it in the show notes for sure.
Amazing young girl at 13 years of age in grade 7. She's over at her friend's house. Ria Caramucci. She's over at her friend's house, and this friend's grandmother is blind and walks into the room with a white cane. And Ria had never seen a white cane before. So she says, what's that? And they explain it to her, and she says, can I touch it? And of course they give it to her, and I don't know, it's balsa wood or it's just basic. And she says, well, where's the technology? Technology, you bounce it against things and it dings a bit maybe. It might have a bell at the bottom if it hits something. This kid has a company called Smart Cane. She's embedding, GPS systems into it. So if somebody gets lost, people can find it. But she's embedding it so if they, that it'll sense things so that if you're in a strange person's house, it'll guide you around furniture. It won't just tell you it's there. It'll say, okay, move to the right, and all of this kind of stuff. Because to her, it's just, well, it's crazy. We have all this technology. Why aren't we using it?
Yeah.
15 years of age, and she's been winning international competitions, and people are throwing all sorts of money at her, and she's just one of so many. There's so many people out there that want to help you too, because the other reality that I think you and I and others of our, you're younger than me, but still your generation and your peers, your business owner peers,
Yeah.
we need to understand the power of using our entrepreneurial expertise and capital with people that are a lot younger than us, that are, regardless of, we may think we've figured this stuff out, but we haven't. They grew up with it between their teeth.
The best business owners that I see are constantly bringing in folks of a different generation, of a younger generation. And as they get older, I think the best business owners know that they are not the smartest of the group. Maybe that's maybe the wrong way to say it, but that's kind of what's happening there. It's like you're always bringing
Not the
in
most
talent.
knowledgeable.
Yeah,
We don't have the most knowledge because we can't. Because we've gained knowledge and experience around, and there are a lot of things in business that are never change. You under promise, over deliver. You can't sell one thing and deliver something else. I had to have a conversation with a client, with someone that I'm a customer of, just the other day on this. This is not cool. You can't do that. So fix it.
Right. Yeah.
But the hows and the way they're doing it, I think there's enormous opportunity to combine capital, which is what young people lack. And also they lack confidence. That's, again, back to what I'm talking about. I mean, this, whether it's my community entrepreneur or however, just meeting, someone like you for coffee or whatever. But the school system, again, is knocking the crap out of their confidence level.
Yeah. And as the founder or the CEO or the folks that are in that capital position or the position of the leader of the business, building that confidence and trusting the folks that are coming in are going to help someone to be a good employee in your business or become an entrepreneur in their own. I think if your business is creating ultimately entrepreneurs that are going out, I mean, there's some downsides to that, but I think it's a real positive. It means that there's something going on in the culture of your business.
And I also really think that the opportunities are there for entrepreneurs to make investments in these kids in their businesses. And, and just be sharing a bit of our capital and our knowledge and letting them do we get to a certain stage. I can no longer work the 60, 70-hour weeks, and I don't want to. I just got back from Paris. I mean, I'm 61 years of age. I'm balancing what the impact that I'm trying to have on life. I don't have the energy level that I had. And, the calmness, when you run into problems, to say, hey, it's okay. I mean, I know it. This feels like the end of the world. Let me tell you 3 stories of things that were worse for me.
Yeah.
Because we know after we've been at it for a while that we actually only remember the hard times for the lessons they taught us. We don't really remember that they felt bad. That part just sort of slips away because you do, unless it takes you right out. But, even there, I got knocked right down to, one employing me and got back up. And I still see it as something to smile and kind of laugh about today because, well, stuff happens.
We were talking about how to take that leap. What you said was find your confidence, market the idea before you take the leap to make sure the idea is not only legitimate to you, but is legitimate to a consumer of some kind, and find a mentor. Those were the things that I heard there.
Yeah, and I think the only other thing that I might add to it is when you're testing that market is to not lie to yourself. Like, I mean, in other words, if the answer is that this is interesting, but it's not right, you have to be able to listen to that and understand that you can still achieve the things you want in life. The path as a business might be a bit different. So as I like to say, expect the unexpected. Like when I started my software company, I was 100% committed to selling educational software to large corporations, government, those kind of things. If somebody had told me that I was going to be selling literacy and numeracy, programs across the country to community colleges for in Indian nations, First Nations, to not-for-profit organizations, I would have told you had 17 heads and didn't, because I know nothing about public education. And it's differentiating between I think also maybe, man, I mean, I almost going back to defining the confidence has to go back to making sure you understand what your goals are. The key is, we can quit proof our goals if we set the goals around the things we really want in life. So for me, I wanted to live in this little community. So whatever I was going to do, it was going to be based on it, being here. I've always felt that I needed to feel value in the things that I was doing. It couldn't just be about, making money.
It was good for someone. Somehow it was good for someone.
It has to,
Yeah.
And then in terms of most people, when they come up with a business idea, it's okay, I think I can provide a product or service better than what's currently being provided, in my little community here or globally or however. That's driven by a desire to help somebody. So who do you want to help and how do you want to help them? Understanding that exactly how you might help them is very likely to change. You've probably got it wrong. Your first idea is probably almost certainly wrong.
Yeah, if you're stuck on that idea, you're not going to succeed,
But in there is very likely a path that will get you to, and then from then on, like, with your business now, hang on for the ride because it's just going to keep changing. And that's the amazing fun thing about being an entrepreneur is that we get to create stuff all the time. I mean, when people ask me, what do entrepreneurs do? I say we create. That's the difference between an entrepreneur and somebody who's just taken a job on an hourly basis to do a task, whether it's a freelancer or not. But if you're an entrepreneur, then you want to create something from nothing. And it's that process that excites you more than anything in the, in the world.
It is great too, I mean, being an entrepreneur it has all the pieces of being a human, it has the ups, it has the downs, it has the emotions, it just really is I've always been a creative person, even when I was a school teacher, and all those kinds of things. And it just being an entrepreneur, I like insurance. I'm good at insurance, but I don't love insurance. I love being an entrepreneur, and I think that's the difference there. So
yeah, well, it's how do you answer that question when somebody says, "What do you do?" If you say, "Well, I sell insurance," well, that's not who you are. That's not what you do.
That isn't
what do you do. I'm an entrepreneur.
Yeah, absolutely.
And big difference.
It really is, and it's describing that to folks really, and it makes you feel a lot different about what you do.
Absolutely.
Tim, if folks want to find you, take 30 seconds and just talk about what you have or where they can find you.
Hi, man. Thanks very much for that. So, look, the easiest place to catch everything, and it's always fun to say this, www.screwthenaysayers.com. So you'll get everything there. But, I definitely would love for people to look up my podcast, which is under the same name, Screw the Naysayers. It's available, everywhere, iTunes, Spotify, all those kinds of places. My online mentoring community is called Entresphere, so ENTRESPHERE. But again, it's all at screwthenaysayers.com. And my book, Screw the Naysayers, They Suck Anyways, is available on Amazon. And it's a short read. It's funny as hell.
Yeah.
It's got a picture on the front of it of two sheep skydiving and one sheep saying to the other one, screw the naysayers, they suck anyways. And it's just, kind of the mantra and philosophy that I think we need to take in a world that's filled with too many people telling us that life sucks.
Awesome. Tim, it's so great to chat with you. Thank you so much. You just shared so much information and so many good ideas, and I feel pumped to go out and continue doing what I'm doing, and I think a lot of our listeners are too. So thanks so much.
Jeremy, thanks for having me on, man.
Awesome.
A special thanks to Tim Allison for taking the time to share the Screw the Naysayers story with us. If you enjoyed this podcast, there's a couple of things we need you to do right now. First, subscribe to Scratch Entrepreneur on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, or wherever you listen to podcasts. While you're there, please review the show. It really does help. If you enjoyed the show, please do share it with your friends on your social media networks and all that kind of stuff. And finally, please do consider joining the Scratch Entrepreneur Facebook group, especially if you're a business owner. That's a space where lots of business owners can talk about lots of things, share ideas, and just learn from each other. In the same way that you learn from each other on this podcast, hopefully you can learn from each other in that Facebook group as well. All right, until the next time, have a wonderful day.